The morning of March 12, 1889, begins like every other morning for Thomas Walsh. He climbs aboard the Pennsylvania Railroad freight train in the Pittsburgh yards, his hands already aching from yesterday's work. He is 23 years old. He has been a brakeman for 11 months. The freight cars stretch ahead of him like iron mountains, each one requiring his attention, each one demanding he place his body between tons of moving steel. By the end of this shift, Walsh will lose 3 fingers to a link and pin coupler. He will be one of the lucky ones. 518 other brakemen will die this year doing exactly what he does. The railroad companies will call it the cost of doing business. This is not a story about a single disaster. This is a story about an entire occupation designed to kill the men who perform it. Between 1880 and 1900, being a railroad brakeman in America is statistically more dangerous than fighting in a war. The odds are simple and brutal. In 1889, 1 out of every 117 trainmen employed will be killed on the job. 1 out of every 12 will be injured. The railroads know this, the engineers know this, the brakemen know this, and for 2 decades almost nothing changes. But to understand why an entire generation of working men is fed into this machine, you need to understand what the railroad means to America in the late 19th century. The Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869. By 1880, the United States operates more track mileage than any nation on Earth, over 93,000 miles of iron threading through mountains, across plains, connecting coast to coast. Freight tonnage explodes. Passenger traffic multiplies. The railroad becomes the circulatory system of American commerce, and like any system pushed to its limits, it begins to break down at its weakest points. Those weakest points are human bodies. The railroad needs men who will step between moving cars, men who will climb atop speeding trains, men who will turn brake wheels by hand in ice storms and summer heat. The railroad needs brakemen, and America's working poor supply them in endless numbers. The pay is decent, better than farm labor, better than factory work. $35 to $45 a month. Enough to feed a family. Enough to make a man ignore the missing fingers on his foreman's hand. The railroad operates on 2 technologies that guarantee injury and death: the link and pin coupler and the manual handbrake. If you want to support this channel and see more content like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're bringing you the untold stories of industrial America every week. The link and pin coupler is simplicity itself, which is precisely the problem. Each freight car has a metal loop, a draw head, protruding from its end. To couple 2 cars together, a brakeman must stand in the space between them as they roll toward each other. He holds an iron pin in one hand. He guides an iron link into the draw head pocket with the other. As the cars come together, sometimes slowly, sometimes at walking speed, sometimes faster, he must drop the pin through the link and the pocket at the exact moment they align. Then he must pull his hands free before the coupler closes. The margin for error is measured in fractions of a second. The consequence of error is instantaneous. Fingers are severed, hands are crushed, arms are torn off at the shoulder. In 1888 alone, coupler accidents kill 300 men and injure more than 6,700 others. This is not the result of carelessness or bad luck. This is the mathematical certainty of a system that requires men to place their bodies in the path of multi-ton machines multiple times per shift, every shift, for years. But the coupler is only half the equation. The other half is stopping the train. In the 1880s and early 1890s, most freight trains lack continuous braking systems. Each car has its own handbrake, a wheel mounted on top of the car connected to brake shoes that press against the wheels. When the engineer signals that the train needs to slow down or stop, The brakeman must run along the top of the moving train, leaping from car to car, turning each brake wheel by hand. Every brakeman carries a thick wooden club, a brake stick, to give him leverage on the wheel. He uses this club to crank the wheel tight, applying enough pressure to slow a car weighing 30 to 40 tons. Then, when the train needs to move again, he must run back along the tops of the cars and release each brake manually. Picture this clearly. You are standing on top of a boxcar moving at 20 miles per hour. The roof is narrow, perhaps 8 feet wide. There is no railing. The wind tears at your coat. In winter, ice coats the running boards. In summer, rain makes the surface slick. You must walk the length of the car, leap across the gap to the next car, land on a surface smaller than a doorway, then bend down and turn a brake wheel until your shoulders burn and your hands bleed. You do this 20 times per train, 40 times per shift, hundreds of times per week. You do this in darkness. You do this in snowstorms. You do this when the train lurches unexpectedly because the engineer has hit a grade or rounded a curve. You do this knowing that if you slip, if you stumble, if the train jerks at the wrong moment, you will fall between the cars or off the side, and the wheels will cut you in half before you can scream. The railroads know how dangerous this is. The casualty figures are not hidden. The Interstate Commerce Commission begins collecting data in the 1880s. The numbers are published. In 1890, the industry reports that 1 in every 28 railroad employees is injured during the year. 1 in every 320 is killed. For trainmen, the category that includes brakemen, conductors, and flagmen, the numbers are far worse. 1 in 9 trainmen is injured annually. 1 in every 156 dies. These are not anomalies. These are patterns. These are documented, recurring, predictable casualties, and the railroads continue operating the same way, year after year, because the alternative requires spending money. The solution to both problems exists. George Westinghouse patents the automatic air brake in 1869. The same year the Transcontinental Railroad is completed. The Westinghouse system uses compressed air to apply brakes throughout an entire train simultaneously, controlled by the engineer from the locomotive cab. It eliminates the need for brakemen to walk on top of cars. It stops trains faster and more reliably. It saves lives immediately wherever it is installed. Eli Janney patents the automatic knuckle coupler in 1873. What specific railroad disaster do you think we should cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. We're always looking for stories that need to be told. The Janney coupler works like 2 hands clasping together. When 2 cars come into contact, the couplers automatically interlock. No pin, no link, no brakeman standing between the cars. A man can couple cars with a long pole from a safe distance, or simply let them bump together and lock. The technology works. It is proven. It is available. And for nearly 20 years, the railroad industry refuses to adopt it as standard equipment. The railroad's reasoning is economic and brutal. Automatic couplers and air brakes cost money to install. Retrofitting a single freight car with air brakes and automatic couplers costs approximately $40 to $60, more than a brakeman earns in a month. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone operates over 100,000 freight cars. The nationwide fleet numbers in the millions. The total cost of conversion would reach into the tens of millions of dollars. Dead brakemen, by contrast, are cheap. There is no federal liability law. State laws are weak and inconsistent. When a brakeman is killed or maimed, the railroad offers the widow or the injured man a small settlement, sometimes $50, sometimes $100, rarely more than $300. If the family refuses and takes the case to court, the railroad deploys the legal doctrine of assumption of risk. The argument is simple. The brakeman knew the job was dangerous when he took it. He accepted the risk voluntarily. Therefore, the railroad bears no responsibility for his death or injury. This defense works more often than not. Juries, even sympathetic ones, accept the premise that a man who chooses dangerous work cannot blame his employer when that danger manifests. The result is a grotesque calculation. It is cheaper to pay death benefits to a few hundred families per year than to spend millions equipping every car with safety devices. The railroads know this. They make this choice consciously. They make it every year. They make it while their executives testify before Congress that the new equipment is unproven, unnecessary, and economically unfeasible. But the pattern extends beyond individual companies. The entire industry follows the same logic. In 1887, there are more than 150 different coupler designs in use across American railroads. None of them are compatible. A car equipped with a Janney coupler cannot couple with a car using a Miller hook or a Lincoln pin system. For automatic couplers to work industry-wide, every railroad must standardize on a single design and retrofit every car at roughly the same time. No company wants to move first. No company wants to bear the cost alone. So they wait. They form committees. They commission studies. They testify before state legislatures and federal commissions, explaining why immediate action is impossible, impractical, too expensive. And while they wait, men keep dying. Between 1890 and 1900, coupling accidents kill an average of 230 trainmen per year and injure thousands more. This is not a natural disaster. This is not an unforeseeable tragedy. This is industrial murder by spreadsheet. The men who do this work understand what is happening to them. They see the missing fingers, the crushed hands, the empty bunks in the boarding houses. They attend the funerals. But they take the jobs anyway, because in 1880s and 1890s America, dangerous work is still work. Factories are dangerous. Mines are more dangerous. Farms break bodies slowly over decades. The railroad at least pays cash money every month. It provides a kind of respect. A brakeman is a skilled position, a step above common labor. And for young men from farms and small towns, the railroad represents something more: movement, adventure, a connection to the larger world. You stand on top of a freight train roaring across the prairie at night, and for a moment you are not just surviving, you are riding the future. The fact that the future might kill you tomorrow does not change the fact that today you are alive and employed. The families know the cost. Wives kiss husbands goodbye, knowing there is a real chance they will not return. Children grow up understanding that father's work is different, more dangerous, that the money on the table comes with a price. Railroad communities develop rituals around injury and death. They take up collections for widows. They share knowledge about which lawyers might take a case against the railroads, which judges might be sympathetic. But they also normalize the carnage. They tell stories about old-timers with missing fingers who still work the yards. They describe close calls with dark humor. They construct a culture that allows men to keep walking onto those trains, because if they do not, the family does not eat. This is not resignation. This is the negotiation working people make with industrial capitalism every day, the calculation that the immediate need for wages outweighs the long-term probability of death. On the morning of August 16, 1887, Lorenzo Coffin is riding a passenger train across Iowa. Coffin is a member of the Iowa Railroad Commission, a former farmer and schoolteacher appointed to regulate railroad operations in the state. He is 59 years old, a deeply religious man who has spent much of his life advocating for temperance and education. At a small station, the train stops to take on water. Coffin steps onto the platform and watches the freight train on the adjacent track begin to couple cars. He sees the brakeman, a young man, no more than 20, step between two moving cars with a link and pin. He watches the cars come together. He hears the sound, metal on metal, the sharp crack of impact. The brakeman jerks his hand back, but not fast enough. The link catches his fingers between the iron surfaces. The man screams. Blood sprays onto the gravel. The brakeman staggers backward, clutching his hand, or what remains of his hand. 3 fingers are gone, sheared off at the knuckle. The train crew barely reacts. This is routine. This is ordinary. This happens every day, on every railroad in every state in the country. Lorenzo Coffin stares at the blood on the gravel, and something breaks open inside him. He will later write that at that moment he felt called by God to end this slaughter. Coffin begins his crusade with research. He tours rail yards. He interviews brakemen and conductors. He collects injury reports. What he finds confirms the horror he witnessed. In 1888, Iowa alone reports 101 railroad employees killed and 496 injured in link and pin coupling accidents. Extrapolating nationwide, thousands of men are being maimed and killed every year by a system that has a known, available, proven alternative. Coffin travels to visit George Westinghouse and Eli Janney. He examines the automatic air brake and the knuckle coupler. He tests them himself. He becomes convinced that these devices could eliminate the vast majority of railroad casualties. He drafts a railroad safety bill and presents it to the Iowa legislature. In 1890, Iowa becomes the first state to pass a law mandating automatic couplers and air brakes on all trains operating within its borders. It is a significant victory. It is also completely ineffective. Railroads ignore the Iowa law. They argue that interstate commerce cannot be regulated by individual states. They point out that trains cross state lines, that cars from non-compliant railroads enter Iowa every day, that enforcing the law would require inspecting every car at the border. The law has no teeth and no funding for enforcement. Railroad companies pay the occasional fine and continue operating as they always have. Coffin realizes that state action is insufficient. The solution must be national. The destruction does not end with the immediate casualties. For every man killed outright, 3 or 4 more are permanently disabled. They lose hands, arms, legs. They suffer crushing injuries to the chest and abdomen that leave them unable to work. In an era before workers' compensation, before disability insurance, before Social Security, these men and their families face economic annihilation. A brakeman who loses his hand loses everything: his job, his income, his future. The railroads offer token settlements, sometimes as little as $50, and walk away. The injured man must find new work in a labor market that has little use for a one-handed worker. Some become crossing guards or station attendants if the railroad feels generous. Most disappear into poverty. Their families disintegrate. Wives take in laundry or boarders. Children leave school to work in factories. The economic damage radiates outward from each injury, destabilizing entire working-class communities. And still, young men line up to take the jobs because there are always more young men, and there is always a shortage of wages. In 1889, Lorenzo Coffin organizes a national railroad safety convention in Chicago. He invites railroad executives, engineers, labor leaders, and government officials. He brings working models of automatic couplers and air brakes. He brings photographs of injured men. He brings widows to testify. He speaks with the fervor of a preacher, which is essentially what he is, a preacher of industrial safety, standing in a gilded hall full of men who have grown rich on the broken bodies of workers. Some railroad officials attend out of curiosity. A few express genuine concern. Most sit with folded arms, awaiting for Coffin to finish so they can return to business as usual. But Coffin is relentless. He travels to Washington. He meets with congressmen and senators. He drafts federal legislation. He testifies before committees. He shows them the numbers. 2,500 railroad workers killed in 1889 alone, 39,000 injured. He shows them the technology, safe, proven, available. He asks a simple question. If we can save thousands of lives with existing technology, why are we choosing not to? The answer, though no one says it explicitly in congressional hearings, is class. The men dying are working-class men, immigrants, rural poor, black workers, men without political power or social capital. Their deaths do not disrupt society. They do not threaten profits. They do not affect the people who make decisions. Railroad executives and shareholders do not ride on top of freight cars. Their children do not couple rail cars in icy rail yards. The violence is contained within a specific class, and as long as it stays contained, the political will to change it remains weak. Coffin understands this. He shifts his strategy. He begins framing railroad safety as an economic issue, not a moral one. He argues that injured workers cost money in lawsuits and lost productivity. He points out that safer trains operate more efficiently. He appeals to railroads' self-interest rather than their conscience. It works, slowly. Some railroad companies begin voluntarily installing automatic couplers and air brakes, not out of compassion, but because the math starts to favor it. As injury lawsuits increase and juries occasionally award larger settlements, the cost-benefit calculation shifts. In 1892, Congress holds hearings on railroad safety legislation. Lorenzo Coffin testifies. Labor unions testify. Injured workers testify. The evidence is overwhelming. The technology is proven. The human cost is undeniable. On March 2, 1893, President Benjamin Harrison signs the Railroad Safety Appliance Act into law. The act requires all trains engaged in interstate commerce to be equipped with automatic couplers, automatic air brakes, and secure grab irons and running boards by January 1, 1898. It is the first significant federal safety regulation in American history. It is a landmark victory for Lorenzo Coffin, for railroad workers, and for the principle that profit does not justify preventable death. But the battle is not over. The railroads immediately begin lobbying for extensions, exemptions, and delays. They argue that the deadline is too soon, the cost too high, the technical challenges too complex. Congress grants extensions. The deadline slips to 1900, then 1901. Some railroads comply early. Others drag their feet until federal inspectors threaten fines. Compliance is uneven, enforcement is weak, and men continue to die. But slowly, undeniably, the numbers change. Between 1893 and 1902, as automatic couplers are gradually adopted across the industry, coupling accidents decline dramatically. By 1902, coupling-related deaths drop by more than two-thirds. Thousands of men who would have died or been maimed under the old system walk away from their shifts intact. The air brake has a similar effect. Trainmen no longer need to walk on top of moving cars in all weather. Stopping distances decrease. Runaway trains become less common. Rear-end collisions decline. The technology works exactly as promised. The lives saved are real, measurable, documented, and the railroads, once they complete the conversion, discover that Coffin was right. Safer trains are more efficient trains. Automatic couplers speed up switching operations. Air brakes allow longer, heavier trains. The productivity gains offset much of the equipment cost. The industry resisted a change that ultimately benefited them, simply because it required upfront investment and broke with tradition. The legacy of the brakeman's era extends far beyond the railroad industry. The Railroad Safety Appliance Act establishes the precedent that the federal government can and should regulate workplace safety, even over the objections of powerful industries. It proves that organized advocacy, combined with undeniable evidence and relentless political pressure, can overcome economic resistance to reform. Lorenzo Coffin, an obscure Iowa farmer turned railroad commissioner, becomes one of the most important safety reformers in American history. He saves tens of thousands of lives. And he does it without holding any real power, without wealth, without institutional support, just moral conviction and the willingness to stand on train platforms and watch men bleed until someone listens. The automatic coupler and air brake become standard on railroads worldwide. The technology spreads to Europe, Asia, South America. Everywhere it goes, it saves lives. The design Eli Janney patented in 1873 remains, with modifications, the standard North American railroad coupler today. You can see it on every freight train rolling through every American town, a piece of technology that represents the transition from acceptance of industrial death to the demand for industrial safety. But we must remember what it took to make that change. 2 decades of preventable death, tens of thousands of men maimed or killed, widows and orphans by the thousands, an entire generation of working men sacrificed to a system that valued efficiency over life, profit over people. The railroads did not change because they wanted to. They changed because men like Lorenzo Coffin forced them to change, because injured workers told their stories, because families buried their dead and refused to accept that this was simply how things had to be. The lesson is not complicated. Industrial capitalism, left to its own devices, all will optimize for profit at any human cost. Safety regulations, workplace protections, and equipment standards do not emerge naturally from market forces. They are fought for, demanded, legislated into existence by people who refuse to accept preventable death as the price of employment. If this documentary made you think differently about industrial safety and workers' rights, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and let us know in the comments what other forgotten chapters of labor history we should cover next. Every brakeman who walks across the top of a freight train today does so with safety railings, harnesses, and strict operational rules. Protections bought with the blood of men like Thomas Walsh, the 23-year-old who lost 3 fingers in a Pittsburgh rail yard in 1889. The trains still run. The freight still moves. The economy still functions. But the men who make it function go home to their families at the end of the shift, and that difference, that simple fact of survival, represents one of the most important transformations in American industrial history. The era of the Lincoln pin coupler and the rooftop brakeman is over. We ended it. We chose to end it, and in doing so, we proved that we are capable of choosing human life over industrial convenience, even when powerful interests insist that such a choice is impossible. That is the legacy. That is what we must remember. That is why the story of the brakeman matters. More than a century after the last Lincoln pin coupler was removed from service, the men who died were not tragic accidents. They were the predictable casualties of a system that knew better and chose differently. We honor them not with monuments, but with the ongoing fight to ensure that no worker, in any industry, is treated as expendable. The railroad is safer now. But the struggle for workplace safety is never finished. The economics that sacrificed brakemen in the 1880s still operate today in different industries under different names with the same fundamental logic: profit above all. The lesson of the brakeman is that we do not have to accept that logic. We can demand better. We can legislate better. We can build systems that value human life as much as they value efficiency. And when someone tells us that safety is too expensive, that regulation will destroy an industry, that workers should simply accept the risks of their occupation. We can point to the railroad, to the automatic coupler, to the air brake, to the thousands of lives saved, and we can say, "You are wrong. We know you are wrong, because we have done this before."